I'm Nathan.
And you're joining us for Thirsty Thursday on the Marriage by Design podcast. This is a time where we talk about a passage of scripture and talk about the background of it and how we can apply it to our lives and our marriages.
That's right. Let's do it.
Yeah, so we are in Philippians 4. We've talked about verses 1 through 7, and now we're in verse 8. Do you want to give some background as to kind of what's going on before I read the verse?
Sure. So the Cliff's Notes version is, and we'll put the Bible Project link if you've not had a chance to check that out right up in the corner here. But basically, the church in Philippi had been established by Paul early on in his missionary journeys. And he had established this church within the community in Philippi, heavily, very patriotic to Caesar community. And as these people were giving up their worship of Caesar and the Roman pantheon of gods to worship Jesus as the true king, that rubbed that whole society the wrong way. And they reacted to that with some pretty severe persecution of that Jesus community, that fellowship of believers that was there in Philippi. And so the Philippian people were asking themselves, well, this is so difficult. We're under constant persecution. People are getting beaten. People are getting killed. People are having these horrible things happen to them. How should we handle this? What can we do? And in this amazing act of humility and generosity, they sent one of their own, Epaphroditus, with a gift to Paul. Because even with all that was going on in Philippi, they knew that Paul had been imprisoned by Rome in a horrible prison. And rather than being self-focused, they desired to send Epaphroditus with a gift for Paul. And so they sent him to the prison in a journey that almost killed him. And he gets to Paul and delivers this gift to Paul. And Paul, in response, writes a letter back to the church of the Philippians.
Yeah, and so, Philippians is that letter.
Right, and it is meant to be a letter of empathy, right, where Paul understands what they're going through. It's meant to be a letter of encouragement, where he's sort of trying to, as we've talked about the last couple of weeks, refocus them from being focused on the physical to being focused on the spiritual. And that really was why we picked Philippians 4, 1 through 13 to talk about this month. Because so often in marriage, we need to be reminded that we need to be invested in the physical. We need to be involved in our physical families and in our physical marriage. But we need to recognize and be focused on the spiritual, right? Our ultimate covenant before the Lord with regards to our spouse, our stewardship relationship with regards to our kids. We need to see all of those things through the prism of our spiritual relationship with the Lord. So that's a little bit of the background. Paul had talked about this couple within the church in Philippi, this couple of women that were in the church in Philippi that had an argument, a big fight, and he addresses that by basically saying, rather than focusing on that, let's rejoice in all things. He says that verse 4, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. And then goes through and talks about making requests known to the Lord through prayer, supplication, and thanksgiving, which Andrea knocked out of the park last week talking about. So check that out. So that really brings us now to verses 8 and 9.
Yep. Yeah, so verse 8 says, "And now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing. Fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Keep putting into practice all you learned and received from me, everything you heard from me and saw me doing. Then the God of peace will be with you."
Right, so in classic Paul parlance, he says one final thing and then goes on for about another 14 or 15 verses after that before he closes down the letter, which was kind of just how Paul rolled. But he says, in my version, I'll read my English Standard Version as well, just to give you a different a little bit different flavor on that. It says, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about those things. What you've learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. So the first thing he does is goes right back to thought life. In verse 8, you go through there, things that are honorable, things that are just, things that are pure, things that are lovely and commendable. It's easy for us to look at that list and think about in human terms, right? I mean, if I took a microphone and I went downtown and said, hey, Joe and Sally on the street, what things...
It's always Joe and Sally.
That's right, darn right. What would you say is just, right? Man, if that's not a buzzword right
now.
If I said, what is just, and I handed the microphone to someone, and I did that with 50 different people, you get 50 different answers about things that are just. The important part is, Paul, this is all in the context of that very first verse 1, where he says, stand firm in the Lord. Now, when he talks about things that are just, things that are honorable, things that are pure, lovely, commendable, he's saying these are defined not by the society around you, but by the personhood, the being of God. God is these things. God is justice. He is purity. He is honor. He is commendable and lovely and beautiful and creative, and the world around us screams these things to us about the nature of God. He's saying, as we know about the nature of God, let's fix our minds on those things that reflect who he is. Again, changing our mind from the physical to the spiritual. And then the last portion, he holds himself up as an example. Now, what a great encouragement for us as we lead in our families, too. He holds himself up as he says, look, you've seen these things in me. Follow in my example. Paul was always so focused on what example he was setting for the people around him, which is inspiring, certainly for me. So first, fix your eyes on these things that are true about God. Second, if you have questions about how to practically live that out, you've seen me live them out. So do what I did.
Yeah. Just that last part, I'll tag along on that, and then I'll go back to 8. Paul's a big replicator. So he's big into replication. You'll see that in a lot of his letters, that we can't be just, listening to somebody or getting fat with Christianity and with the Bible and all that. We've got to go out and live it and replicate that and be teaching others to replicate that as well. And so that's what part of what that verse 9 is talking about. Like, don't just get fat with knowledge or with scripture or with relationships that are feeding you, but go out and do that too.
Paul, if I can just give a practical example of that, babe, because Paul talks about that. If you read through his letters, he is obsessed with making sure people are doctrinally sound and know how to live that doctrine out in their lives. And he makes the analogy several times throughout his various epistles that he looks at the churches he founded or that were founded by others that he was shepherding. He was trying to present them, he describes it as a pure virgin to the Lord once they move on from this world and move into heaven. And what he's saying is, in the same way that a father's responsibility at this time culturally was to ensure that their daughter was a virgin on the day of their wedding, and that's a super interesting part of Jewish culture that we can talk about at some point, but that was a part of a father's responsibility. He's saying, I view myself as your dad, and I want to make sure that I deliver you to Christ. I deliver the church, the bride of Christ, to Christ at the end of your lives as a pure virgin. He was very concerned that when he died, that was going to be it, because he was the head of all of these Jesus communities. And so, it's a lot similar. Maybe you have experienced this in your family. I know we have in our family, where like the matriarch, the mom and dad of a group of your aunts and uncles or whatever, where you got together forever all the time at grandma and grandpa's house, and the concern is, man, when grandpa and grandpa die, are we going to still all get together? And tragically, so often we see the answer to that oftentimes is no.
Right.
And that's what Paul was afraid of, is, man, when I die, are these people strong enough to continue on their own? And here we are 2,000 years later, still reading what Paul wrote and putting it into practice in our churches and in our lives.
It's cool. Yeah, so to back up to verse 8, he's saying, fix your thoughts on what is true, honorable, right, pure, lovely, admirable. So we've talked about in this podcast stinking thinking, and that can get us down such a bad rabbit hole. So just having those thoughts of just the negative thoughts. In marriage, we can talk about that with, having those negative thoughts about your spouse or about your marriage or whatever, and just focusing on those. Those become a snowball very quickly because they just get bigger and bigger and consume you more and more, and then your whole attitude towards your spouse or your marriage is just nasty. Yeah. And it replicates itself. And so Paul's saying, when you're choose thoughts that are good thoughts, choose thoughts that reflect the Lord's character, so that you're really focusing on the Lord. And then he said, if there's anything of excellence, anything worthy of praise, think on those things. Can you find anything in your husband that is excellent and worthy of praise? Probably at least one thing. So think about that. Be thankful for that. Tell him that. And choose to find other things that are worthy of praise, rather than thinking about all the negative things. Because really, what is that going to do for you to focus on those negative things? Well, it's going to take you to a more and more negative place, and that's what's going to pour out of you.
Yeah, it's a foothold to temptation.
Totally. So take those thoughts captive of those anything that's not true, honorable, right, pure, lovely, admirable. Take those thoughts captives to the obedience of the Lord. So give those to the Lord. I don't want to be thinking about this. Fill my mind with instead something that is good, something that reflects your beauty, Lord. And then again, keep putting into practice all that you learned and received from me. So what you're reading in the scripture, put it into practice. Don't just read it, do it.
Yeah.
Do it. And then that brings such honor to the Lord, but then it also is talking about peace, which peace was talked about in last week, in the portion that we talked about last week. And peace had to have been such a big deal for the Philippians because they were under such persecution.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of peace.
And it's hard to feel. How do you feel peace when you're being persecuted so terribly? Well, because it comes from the Lord. It doesn't come from the circumstance.
Right.
So yeah, just a big thing in here of getting your focus off of the temporal and onto the eternal.
Right. It really changes your entire mindset.
It does. And this is something that I get out of whack with a lot, and then have to confess that and bring those thoughts into the obedience of the Lord. Take those thoughts captive to the obedience of God. And it's a constant struggle, a constant grind for me to do that, but it's worth it to put the effort into it, because it changes my life, it changes my marriage.
Right.
There was probably a week, 1 week, maybe 10 days, where I saw this verse, Philippians 4:8, written out or said or whatever 5 different times. And it was recently, not in a time that I felt like I really needed it, but it was probably 2 weeks ahead of the time that I really ended up needing it.
That's good.
And the Lord is so good to bring that, bring that reminder to me.
Yep.
And remind me, your thoughts need to be focused on the eternal. So
that's good. And that a practical benefit of that too is when you step back from a situation, it does help give you the strength to get through it.
Yeah.
You share, and maybe share briefly, what is it that gets you through the pain of childbirth, right? Which I've heard. I mean, I've heard is kind of, it hurts a little bit. I guess. I don't know. I'm always fine when Andrea's going through labor, but yeah. So we share what, if you focus on the moments of the pain,
right,
then it would drive enough to drive you crazy.
Yeah. So childbirth obviously is very painful, and what gets me through is knowing this pain will end. I'll get a break. I get a break. And then, there's going to be more pain with the next contraction and all that, but it's not going to last forever.
Yeah.
And that's true with any pain on
That's right.
earth. Even if it lasts forever here on earth, that's not our eternity.
Right, which it did for the Philippians.
It did.
Just to be clear.
Right, it did. But that's not their eternity. Their
Right.
eternity is so much more than this. And if we can get our heart set into a place of, I'm going to be obedient to God's will, whatever that is, and knowing that may mean life is not what I wanted it to be.
Mm.
But if I can reach eternity and say, I did that for the glory of the Lord, and that's not my life anymore.
Yeah.
The eternity is perfection, and I lived my life to the glory of the Lord. What better thing is there?
It's great. It's great, man. Good. Awesome.
So we're wrapping up next week with 10 through 13. We're going to go through 13 in week 4, right?
That's right.
Okay. And so we're going to be talking about that in the last week.
That's right. Guys, we'll be finishing up tomorrow our interview with Jordan and Brandon. So we'd love to have you join us. Hope you've enjoyed our series on technology on Family Fridays. Mm-hmm. I know it's been insightful for us. Then we'll write in the journal this weekend, and then we will be back at it. We'll write in the
my
journal.
Diary.
She does the diary, and then I'll tell you really what's up after that. So we'll do that this weekend. Back at it next week, guys. Thanks so much for joining us, and have a great day.
Hey, thanks for joining us on Marriage by Design. If you were impacted by this video, like it by hitting the thumbs up below. Also, don't forget to subscribe, and once you subscribe, hit the bell icon so you can be notified when new episodes release.
Excellent. Also, one of the huge pillars of our show is interactivity between us and you. So we would love you to comment down in the comments below if you have thoughts about this video, or if you have questions or other things you'd like to see considered in the future. In addition, if you'd like, you can email us. That's marriagebydesignpodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Instagram @marriagebydesignpodcast, or you can find us on Facebook by searching Marriage by Design Podcast. Finally, if you want to, you can tweet at us. We do have a Twitter account that is @MarriageXDesign. Thanks, and have a great day.